Okay, so welcome everyone to today's Berkeley Pharma Tech Foundation Speaker Series seminar. My name is Tiffany Terry, and I'm a volunteer with the foundation. We're delighted to have you join us today. The Berkeley Pharma Tech Foundation is dedicated to increasing access for scientists and entrepreneurs in biotech through education, mentorship, and professional opportunities. Through this speaker series, we bring together industry leaders to share insights on cutting edge biotech innovation, entrepreneurship, commercialization, and career development. Our goal is to foster a community where scientists and builders learn from real experiences and grow together. Please follow us on LinkedIn and on Instagram for updates and stay tuned for our upcoming seminars and conferences. And feel free to reach out to Van Loen, who's the president of the foundation, to explore more ways that you can engage with our mission. Okay. So today we are excited to welcome our speaker, Stephen Grant. Stephen is a seasoned life sciences executive, entrepreneur, investor, and mentor with decades of experience spanning biotechnology, medical devices, diagnostics, and life sciences services. Throughout his career, he has helped build and scale organizations, raise capital, support startup growth, and bring innovative technologies to market. He is also an active mentor to founders and emerging entrepreneurs through programs such as NSF iCorps and Nucleate. Today's session will be a fireside chat, so rather than a formal presentation, Stephen and I will have a conversation about commercialization, company building, fundraising, and biotech innovation. We'll also leave time for audience questions. You can place your questions in the chat or raise your hand during the Q&A session to ask a question. So please join me in welcoming Stephen.
Thank you, Tiffany. Much appreciated. Great to be here, everybody.
All righty. So Stephen, you've had a remarkably diverse career spanning startups, large organizations, commercialization, fundraising, mentoring entrepreneurs. Looking back, what originally drew you to the life sciences industry? And did you ever imagine your career would take you in this direction?
Great question. Well, I ended up here in this industry. I won't say by a fluke, but my background is I have an engineering degree from the Merchant Marine Academy. Spent 2 years overseas in Japan working for a company over there right when I graduated. And then came back to the States, and I had a friend of mine that was a recruiter for Fortune 50 companies, and we had dinner about 2 weeks after I got back, and he said, what are you thinking about doing? I said, well, I kind of like to be in, technical, the technical aspects of things. And he said, what about technical sales? I said, I don't even know what it is, but tell me a little bit more about it. Well, very long story short, I ended up working for a company called Dexter Corporation, which is located in Windsor Locks, Connecticut. And Dexter Corporation was the oldest company on the New York Stock Exchange. And their claim to fame was nonwoven papers. And when I say nonwoven papers, think of a Lipton tea bag. That's a nonwoven paper. And they actually invented that process. I worked for their hospital life science group, and they sold that type of material into hospitals, clinics, research labs, things like that. So that's how I got started in the industry, and found it fascinating. The more I learned, and then had opportunities to go work with other companies in different parts of the industry, whether it be more real sterile consumables or automation equipment, analytical equipment, things like that, all the way up to the services industry with CDMOs. So yeah, that's how I got into this industry, and it served me quite well. I've never had a boring day in my career, that's for sure.
Okay. One more sort of opening question so that we can get to know a little bit more about you. So you've worked with an incredible range of technologies, like you just mentioned, companies and founders throughout your career. When people ask what you do, how do you describe your role in the biotech ecosystem?
Um, that's a great question, Tiffany. I like to describe it as a connector. And I don't mean that in the terms of personal connections. It's business possibilities, partnerships between companies, or looking for an established company that could use something that a startup company I'm working with has in their portfolio. Yeah, I mean that's kind of how I describe it. I can probably describe it in many different ways, but I think being a being here today and on the spot, that's how I would say, at this point, I would describe it. Um, I have, my family, my sister and other members of my family always say to me, people ask us what you do and we don't know what to tell them. So that's kind of one word that I would think. And traditionally you think of connector as, people making connections between other people. I like to make connections between businesses. Um, and there's been a huge opportunities have spun out of that. And we read about it every day with, an AbbVie or a Lilly or a Merck or somebody acquiring a, smaller company. They're connecting with these small companies through folks like myself, investors and mentors and things like that. So, it's that's how I describe it.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so one thing that stands out from your career, that you've worked with many companies at different stages of growth, and so that will lead right into my first question. So, so you've worked across startups, large enterprises, CDMOs, as you mentioned, and commercial leadership roles through the biotech industry. Looking back, what do you think are the biggest differences between great science and a truly viable biotech company?
Um, one of my one of my mentors, and I've only had a couple throughout my career, has always said that the gap between great science versus a viable biotech company um, is where the value is created or destroyed. Um, we all know great science is about truth, finding the truth, asking a well-formed question, designing rigorous experiments around that, producing findings that hold up. Um, there's those are all just pieces of this puzzle of putting the two together, great science to build a viable biotech company. Um, it can be destroyed as well, where it becomes too much trying to make the round wheel rounder, as I say, where you never get to that point. You're always trying to make the experiments better and better and better to get to something that you're already at, and you may lose a chance at developing that company. So that's why the two, it's either created or destroyed, depending on how well you work the science and try to commercialize that.
Okay, so you mentioned value, right? That there
Mhm.
needs to be some value. Could you explain that a little bit more?
Um, yeah, value has to be something you have to bring to a product to an addressable market. What's the value of that product to the market you want to go after? Um, you know, it's solving a lot of problems to get something that's viable to that market, whether it be a med device, whether it be a therapy, whether it be a piece of analytical equipment, um, you know, all of the above. You have to have, you know, that market that you're going after needs that value that you have to provide to them.
Okay. So I know I've heard about, the TAM SAM SOM, right? Which kind of like gives you an idea of like the market size. How can is that a good way to sort of assess your market, or what's the best way that people can try to attempt to figure out what their market is?
Um, I'll use a term that they use in the NSF program for their cohorts. The beachhead market theory, right? Coming up with a beachhead market, um, and they're very specific on that. They want you to have one market. I believe that some of the companies that I worked with and are working with have multiple addressable markets because of the flexibility of their technology. And as an example, if I work with a company that has an oncology therapy and it just targets prostate cancer, that's all it does. Others, they may have a platform that can target prostate cancer, breast cancer, colon cancer, lung cancer, all different types of opportunities there. So it's finding a beachhead market is kind of the standard way of doing it, but the more I see companies and the more I work with startups, they're developing, maybe option A is the beachhead market. Then you have option B, C, and D to go after as well. So in answer your question, that's kind of how it seems to unfold.
Okay. So many scientists are trained to think about discovery, but not necessarily commercialization. So, what are some of the earliest signs that a specific innovation has real commercial potential?
Again, doing customer interviews or potential customer interviews, when you're thinking about what you want your company to be, what you're developing, what you want to bring out of the lab, and maybe have already patented or want to patent it. Um, it's it's tough for scientists because you spend your life in a lab or part of your life in a lab, and when you start thinking about these things, and I run into this quite a bit with teams coming out of Nucleate, and even the NSF I-Corps program or iGEM. There's this great technology or great idea, but the roadblock to bringing it further is difficult in a lot of aspects. Um, just because you have a great technology doesn't mean everybody's going to want it. So you really have to establish that need for this as you're coming out of the lab and want to build a company out of that technology.
So, your advice to, potentially someone in our audience who's at that place and, has great science, but hasn't really thought about, how to commercialize it. Like, what's one of the first things that they should do?
Here's what I see more often than not. There's a company that's spinning out of, let's say, Nucleate, University of Texas or University of San Diego or some university somewhere, worldwide at this point, right? Um, I look at pitch decks and I look at a lot of pitch decks, and I always see a pitch deck that's loaded with PhDs, but they have no commercial people on there. And it makes me nervous to see that because they haven't thought of that. Okay, how do we bring this to market? You know, um, you got a deck full of scientists, which is great. If you have to have, customer inquiries, customer problems, you want to further develop the technology, but a lot of it is missed from the commercial side. And you really, as you spin out, you have to start thinking about this commercial side sooner rather than later. It has to be a thought. Um, I've seen plenty of companies think they have a great technology and, they're just kind of throwing darts at a dartboard to see where it fits, and that comes from not having a commercial direction. So it's important, it's key. That's probably one of my biggest piece of advice to a startup company is really start thinking about the commercial aspect of this early on. Don't wait until you're out of the lab and you have the patent. And now what do I do? How do I bring it to market? That's going to be a tough road to climb.
Okay. I know that you've also also mentioned in your intro that you've mentored many entrepreneurs through programs like Nucleate or the NSF I-Corps? Are these, and if you could name a few others, are these sort of programs that would be useful for, a scientist who thinks they have something really good, just to sort of get the perspective, from someone who's like yourself, who's, you know, been on this journey and has helped many other startups? Are those programs where they could maybe try to go to get this information?
Yes, highly recommend. There's iGEM, which is the synthetic biology side, Nucleate, which can be anything from med device to synthetic biology to industrial biology to working in therapies and on the oncology market. And then there's the NSF I-Corps program, which is it's through the NSF, National Science Foundation, very well respected. Um, any one of these three programs. Now I know iGEM and Nucleate, you have to have some type of university affiliation, to be involved with them. But I've seen people that connect with a university department or a professor that have already been out on their own, and there's a connection there, and they enter into the program and come out. NSF is more of a it's more of a wide range acceptance. It's very difficult to get into. They kind of just really started up again. They with the funding reestablished through the government. So they're a more open group, if you will, for accepting companies. But yeah, any one of the above, if you can get into any one of them, you have some great leadership in those groups. You have the opportunity to work with great commercial leaders and other scientists as well. But from the commercial side, I think it's hugely beneficial to work with any one of them.
Okay. So from your perspective, what separates biotech companies that successfully attract funding and strategic partnerships from those that struggle to gain traction?
You have to be flexible, right? And um, you have to look at all possibilities. You have to open all the doors. And again, you're going to hear this come up quite a bit, throughout this discussion, is the commercial side, right? You have to have good commercial leadership. And that doesn't mean having a team of BD people or salespeople. It means having a good, solid commercial leader or leaders that can help you form those relationships, that can guide you down that path of, partnerships with a Merck or a Lilly or an AbbVie or somebody like that, to, at least start the discussions. Do they always lead to an endpoint? Maybe not immediately, but they will help you get to at least have a seat at the table to have those discussions. One of the things that I find is very detrimental to that is, when a startup company does not have a good commercial leader, and maybe their founders and co-founders, they don't understand the commercial side, so they keep trying to want to do things a certain way and think that everybody's going to buy their technology because they developed it. It doesn't work that way. You really have to have that plan, and you have to have that thought process of, do I want to form an established company? Is this going to be my legacy company? Am I going to build this and run it for the next 10, 15, 20, 25 years? Or am I going to build something that somebody may want to acquire? So there's a lot of different things you have to look at when you're doing this. And the other thing about that is, if you're multiple founders, co-founders, founder, you have a couple different people in that loop, you all have to be aligned on that too. What do we want to do? What is this company going to be? Are we going to build this company and run it and pass it off to our kids? Or are we going to, get it ready to go and then get involved in a partnership, or, talks about acquisition with another company after, 4, 5, or 6 years. So there's a lot to think about when you're doing this, but I think it's important to really, as a founder, co-founder, be open-minded to the commercial people you bring in. They've done this before. They know how to do it. They know how to bring a technology or a product or a medical device to market. They're not there for no reason at all. And that's one of the biggest mistakes I see is founders don't listen to the commercial people they bring in. And that's when, going back to my first quote was, um, great science versus viable biotech company. That's where a viable biotech company gets destroyed when they stop. You lose focus on that commercial side.
So given your experience building commercial organizations, and you might have already sort of touched on this, but when should an early stage biotech company begin thinking seriously about the commercialization strategy?
That's a $1 million question, right? Um, you know, do you have the addressable market kind of identified? Can you be reproducible in your product all the way through to to manufacturability? Um, you know, you have to have all the pieces in place before, not necessarily beforehand, but at least you're thinking about it and you've got some ideas, and hopefully you have somebody from a commercial standpoint that you're using as a guide or a mentor or an advisor or as a consultant or something like that, or even in a fractional role, a fractional chief commercial officer or chief business officer, however you want to call it. um, so they can take that, they can sit down with you and say, okay, these are the steps we have to take to make this, to get this product to the commercial market. And so those discussions have to start pretty early on, not at the inception of, well, this is what we're thinking about for our technology. But, once you've got some verified results, some data that can be, put into a pitch deck and put into a shared document file for investors to look at, that's when you need to be thinking about these things.
Okay. I just kind of sort of want to touch back on the previous question that I asked about what separates biotech companies that are successful and attract funding and strategic partnership. Would you be willing to give us an example, like in your own experience, like amongst the companies that you've worked with?
Sure, sure. There's a few different examples I guess I could use, but the one that comes to mind is a uh, is a group over in uh, United Arab Emirates that I worked with. I met their founder probably 5 years ago, and a young guy just out of university, and we had many conversations about what he wanted to do with his technology. And, you know, over a series of discussions and meetings and, Zoom calls and phone calls and, you know, finally got established in a direction which made sense for the company. The company is now known as Pioneera, Pioneera. Their CEO is Alareza Daneshvar. Um, Very smart gentleman. He actually made the 30 under 30 list 2 years ago. But he was kind of the classic example of, he was super intelligent, but he listened to how the commercial side worked, and he was able to kind of pivot throughout his journey, and is now kind of one of the leaders in the startup community in the oncology market over in the UAE. So his company's done quite well in a very short period of time. But his greatest talent was listening to people that were there to try to help him, and he followed the advice quite well. And he's become very successful. He does many talks throughout the UAE and the region. Like I said, the company has been fantastic. They've grown in leaps and bounds over the past just 2 years. So very a good example of how to do it the right way.
Perfect. So as we come into more mentoring, as you just mentioned, so you have mentored many startups through programs like Nucleate and NSF Corp. What advice would you give trainees, academic founders, or first-time entrepreneurs trying to translate innovation into a successful company?
Um, Again, there's a couple different pieces of the recipe, right? Um, in order to make a good, cake, you have to have flour and milk and eggs and, put it in the oven at the right temperature and have it come out, and cook it the right amount of time. It's the same thing with building a company. You have to have a lot of different pieces of a lot of different ingredients come together to make this company. Um, you know, as we talked about earlier, there's plenty of um, groups out there that you can get involved in, or like Nucleate and iGEM and NSF. And I'm not here to sell any of those at all. I'm just saying from my experience, those are good opportunities where you get a good base of potential advisors, consultants, mentors, things, and they will stay with you throughout your journey if you choose to work with them, which is kind of nice. But in order to make the company work, in order to make your baby come to life, if you will, there's a lot of these different pieces. Having a good team, being able to pivot if you need to, having a good, addressable market, beachhead market, however you want to refer to it as. Your product has to be reproducible. If it's a therapy, it has to be reproducible, at both small and large scale when you go to manufacture it. Um, you know, um, it has to have a good narrative behind it from the regulatory perspective. Um, there's so many different pieces of this that all have to come together. And look, my hats are off to everybody that has spent the time to get their PhD. I am not a scientist, never claimed to be, but the people that have that science background, you know, um, are hugely important to where this industry is growing, where the industry is going, I'm sorry. And their technology has to go to that next level and has to get commercialized in order to have it be viable and help, you know, somebody along the line, either to extend a life or save a life completely. And, that's what we're all here for.
Okay. Um, I have one last question for you. Just want to get your perspective on the funding landscape. A lot has happened over the last few years, and just wanted to hear your thoughts on what you think about the funding landscape for, life sciences.
Um, Excellent question. And we'll start with we'll get the negative out of the way first. Yes, the past couple of years have been difficult. Um, I think the post-COVID hangover took a little bit longer to go away. Um, and now we're seeing, we're out of that. And from a personal perspective, I saw that start taking place in probably mid to late October of last year, where purse strings started to loosen up a little bit. Investors started talking to more companies. They were more accepting of pitch decks coming in. Um, taking a look at them seriously instead of just putting them in a file. And I just read an interesting statistic on Saturday that in the first quarter of 2026, there's been $65 billion worth of investment in North America with acquisitions, and granted, some of these are big acquisitions. They're billion, $2, 3, $4 billion acquisitions by larger biotech companies with smaller companies that have an asset that they need to build out their portfolio. That was the most money spent in a quarter since 2018. So pre-COVID numbers are now kind of coming back around after the fact. From individual investors, there was just the big venture summit out in Silicon Valley last week. A lot of great reports coming out of there. A lot of companies, a lot of investors kind of opening up their doors and talking to more people and looking at more possibilities for investment. So, here in the Boston area, same thing. I mean, you see, Flagship, Third Rock, Arch Ventures, a lot of different companies, kind of willing to take those meetings, whereas last year at this time, they didn't want to talk to anybody. So, I think the outlook is very positive. I think it will continue to be positive throughout the rest of this year and certainly well into 2027, 2028. So all in all, we did go through a couple tough years, but we came out of it, late last year, and now we're seeing the fruits of that as we go through this year so far.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for sharing all of that, Stephen. We're going to open up for the audience to ask questions. So if anyone has a question, please. Oh, wait, we have one in the chat. Oh, awesome. Perfect. Okay, so this is from Matthew. I was curious if we could also ask Stephen what he thinks are the best signs of pace for a company, not too fast and not too slow. What's the Goldilocks rate of growth?
Boy, that's the $1 million question too, right? You know, I worked not with a company, but I had a dinner one time with a CEO of a company where they had an opportunity to, and they were, I wouldn't call them a startup, but they were, kind of really making more inroads into the market. It was analytical equipment. And they had an opportunity because their biggest competitor, well, their only competitor, lost their funding and had to shut down. And this company that was still in existence had an opportunity to really go out there and be the knight in shining armor on the white horse. And I'll never forget the conversation ended with, I don't think we want to grow that fast. And so to this day, they're still struggling. They could have, probably quadrupled their business in a very, very short period of time. So I mean, if it's a technology, if it's a medical device, if it's a therapy that, people are going to really look at, and you've kind of got to be ready for that growth spurt. It doesn't always happen like magic. Sometimes it takes a little bit more time. But there are times when, all of a sudden you find you're kind of the most wanted company on the block, and it can be good and it can be bad because a lot of people don't plan for that, that initial really fast spurt of success, and it can be overwhelming. So, I guess my advice is you have to kind of try to find, put your thought process to what if, but also don't lose focus on the here and now,
Okay, perfect. We have another question in the chat from Van Lowen. So, as you make connections between businesses, how do you go about making those connections? Is it at a business conference, through friends and family, through cold calls? What has worked well for you in the past?
Look, I've been doing this a long time, 30 plus years. So I've built a really tremendous network. And, it hasn't been all my own doing. It's been through connections. It's been through working with companies, keeping in touch with people. It's been working with the mentorship programs like NSF and Nucleate. It's being connected through others through LinkedIn. There's no, I wish there was a secret formula to it, but it's something that I'm always aware of, and I'm always looking at new. If I see a new company on LinkedIn, I'll kind of look to see who I know, or if there's somebody I don't know, I always like to find out a little bit more about that company, and then the connection chain starts all over again, right? Um, so there's not really one specific way I do it. It's just kind of it's things that I've learned over the years through other people, and I've incorporated that into my own kind of collection database of business names, people names. My connection, my contact list starts at the C level, CEO level, all the way down to director and lab assistant. So there's a wide range, and I had president of one of my established companies I worked for a while, for a long time, 10 plus years, was Nalji Nunk. And our president at the time, David Della Penta, said, make friends with everybody from the receptionist to the guy that's sweeping the floor while you're sitting there waiting for your contact to come down. He said, because it always comes in handy. So I guess I've always followed that advice throughout my career.
That sounds like very good advice. We have a question from Paul. Go ahead, Paul.
Well, thanks, Stephanie, and thanks, Stephen, for the time today. Stephen, I'd be curious, thinking about kind of large pharma partnerships and deals, after a company has kind of their beachhead indication, when is the right time to begin engaging with large pharma to start kind of building that relationship for a future partnership or acquisition opportunity?
Well, that's a fantastic question. My answer to that is very simple. It's never too early. It's
Okay.
never too early. I mean, if you can get a connection in there and, talk about your technology, whatever it may be, just to kind of get your foot in the door, as they say. I don't believe it's ever too early. I think, a lot of startup companies think that it will be too early, and they miss out on chances.
Mhm.
And it's the companies, that I know over the past couple of months, there's been companies that I knew of that have been established like 3, 4, 5 years ago. And one of the first things they started doing was pounding away at the Lillies and the AbbVies and the Sanofis and the
Yep.
Novartises of the world. And then I see their name that they just got acquired for one in the case, $10.6 billion,
Yeah, yeah.
recently. It's never too early, because if you get in ground floor, and you do have to be strategic about it. If you're looking at some new form of GLP-1, obviously you're going to go to somebody that's kind of specializing in that GLP-1, or if it's
Mhm.
on oncology therapy, somebody that's specializing in that. But as long as you kind of get your name in there and let them know what you're doing, it may not be the opportunity at that minute, but I guarantee you're in the door and you will be remembered, and they will, as long as you keep up those connections and those contacts, they'll be of interest.
Just a quick follow-up to that, maybe. Do you find those a best approach to go through kind of like the BD side of these companies or kind of R&D, or is it just like on all fronts, whoever you can get kind of time on their calendar for a chat, just kind of
I
pursue
tend
it
to
anyway?
Yeah, I tend to stay away from the BD side. I mean,
Okay,
they're out trying
interesting.
to move the product from the company. I would go more towards the R&D.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of companies have tech ops, right? Tech ops
Yep.
people, or new technology development departments. Any one of those would probably be a faster path to a good connection within the company that would want to talk to you.
Very helpful. Thank you so much.
Sure, sure, Paul. Great questions.
Okay, we have another question in the chat from Geeta. Can tech accelerators like YC or Techstars be beneficial to biopharma startups? Do you recommend any other programs besides the three you mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, Techstars, I did something with Techstars LA back in 2019. Yeah, there's plenty of other programs. There's, locally here in Boston, we have two groups, Mass Life Science Center and we have Mass Bio. Mass Bio is probably the biggest and the most well-respected nonprofit biotechnology pharma group in the United States. They were the original back 30, I think it's 34 years ago they formed. They have spun out, an education portion, Mass Bioed. They've spun out a entrepreneurial program like a Nucleate or a iGEM called Mass Biodrive. Um, so locally there are these programs. There's now one down in South Carolina, I just participated in as C Bio, and they're a same type of thing, mentorship-based program where they choose companies and you apply for being a part of them, part of their the program, their startup program. And if they accept you, then the kind of the cohort starts and you get paired up with mentors or industry experts. And so there are Gita, there's a lot of organizations out there like that.
Okay, we have another question in the chat from Christine. Do you have any advice for how someone who's firmly grounded in the traditional biomedical research space can find and recognize the kind of high quality commercial team members that are so essential to this process?
Yes. I mean, look, definitely. I mean, 95% of the people that I work with are exactly that. They're grounded in their industry, whether it be biomedical, whether it be med device, whether it be analytical equipment, or some type of bioindustrial, side of the business. You know, they're all doing the same thing. They're all very, very tied into what they're doing. And, going back to contacts and things like that, it's reaching out to people. I've had a lot of people reach out to me through on LinkedIn, over the years. Hey, I saw you have a, background in sensor technology for bioinformatics or bioprocessing, or and you just reach out to people. You find somebody, and people will talk to you. I mean, if you want to engage in a conversation, I always say it's good to reach out. It may be, again, it may be uncomfortable, to do that initially. But once you do it once, you do it twice, do it three times, it gets easier and easier. And then there's a lot of people like me that do this, that do talks like this, or talks at the bio shows or the conferences and things like that. And this is one of the things that comes up quite a bit is, if we're really rooted in what we do, how do we kind of break out of that? How do we do that? And so it's just a matter of reaching out and making one connection, and then one connection turns into three connections, and then six connections, and just kind of like a snowball downhill.
There was a follow-up question in the chat, and what you said, I think covers it, but I just wanted to share it with you. Someone was saying, how can a less experienced scientific team best recruit a business lead with a previous exit? So you're saying, just reach out to people.
Yeah, just reach out. I mean, you can, if you're part of a university, you can go through the university and you can ask questions on that. I'll take George Church for an example, our good friend at Harvard that spun out countless number of companies. Um, you know, there's not George Church, but there is somebody like him in each university that may have a connection of somebody that has started a business successfully out of their lab, and they can make that connection to you and say, hey, let me connect you to so and so. They've started a company, they came out of my lab, things like that. So you can always fall back on universities to ask where the success has been, and if they can connect you, through there, if you're part of a university. If you're not, which not everybody is, a good way to do it is, just reach out, look through LinkedIn or go to a conference or things like that, and just kind of start asking those questions. Reach out to investors as well. That's another kind of an untapped form that I have used for the past 5 or 6 years, and it's proven to be very successful.
Anyone else have a question for Stephen? You can raise your hand and ask the question. You don't necessarily have to put it in the chat.
Any question? Is there? Oh yeah, you were picking up the chat questions, correct?
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, there's no, I'd like to tell everybody that there's no secret sauce here. I mean, look, and this is something I tell every group that I work with, And I've always been this way because it's just how I was taught. Um, I don't know everything. I can't, I don't have all the answers. I learn as much from folks like yourselves when I'm working with you to help you bring a product to market as you would from me. And I know some of the younger teams are like, huh, how's that possible? You've been doing this for 30 years. Trust me, every day is a learning experience for me. And, I guess what I would say, piece of advice is let every day be a learning experience for you when it comes to, how you're going to bring your technology to market. Have an open mind. You know, I'm very wary to say, um, you know, don't go out and enlist the comments of, 10, 15, 20, 30 other people, because you're going to get different directions from all of them. And you're going to end up back at the beginning being very confused. Find somebody that knows their way around the commercial side and listen to what they have to say, because 9 out of 10 times they'll be right. Nobody's right 100% of the time, but people like me have done this before. We know what we're doing. We've had success in bringing startup companies to market and technologies to market. We've mentored a lot of great people that have gone on to do very successful things. So it's as I said earlier, it may be hard to do that, but there'll be a lot of pressure taken off you if you do. You go out and find some good folks from the commercial side to help you alleviate that pressure on, oh God, what do I do now? How do I get this to market?
Okay. I
Stephanie, I
just
had a question.
go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
My question was, I know you mentioned investors, like for the startup companies, like what's your strategy for like which investors to reach out to? Because there are investors working in many different areas. Some don't even invest in pre-seed, seed. So how do you funnel that? Like, what's your
Well,
strategy there?
that's a great question, Geeta. And yes, there's certain investors that will work only with pre-seed companies. There's certain investors that will only work with seed round. There's certain investors that will work with Series A on up. Um, and it's just reaching out and trying to find, ask the questions, pull down, go to a Chat GPT or a Claude and say, who are the top 50 investors for pre-seed in, biotech or pharmaceutical or medical device, whatever it may be. And, you start there and you start whittling away that list. When you're talking to them, you can always ask them, who else do you know or that you've worked with, maybe in a partnership, is into pre-seed funding for startup companies. Um, and it's become more prevalent where there are investors that look at just pre-seed, that look at seed round. You're always going to have your companies that from Series A on up. Some of them will go Series A and Series B, and that's it. And so they become more, I won't say siloed, but they become more segmented in the past few years. By design, I don't know. By nature, don't know that either. But it seems to be everybody's finding that niche market that they can fit into, as an investor. So that is a great question. And, I always try to keep a running list of investors and what they look at, whether it's a therapy, whether it's a piece of analytical equipment, what they invest in, where is their market? What are they interested in? You're going to get some that say, nah, not interested, because it's just not what they do. It's not, they don't look at a therapy market. They want to be more involved in the equipment side of things. So, it's taking your time, doing some research on the investors, getting to the right ones, using people like myself that, have talked with a lot of investors and kind of have an idea of, hey, I know this company called Zinc VC. They're over in the UK. All they deal with is pre-seed companies, and that's a real name, by the way, Zinc VC. They do. I've worked with them before, and they're a fantastic group. There's others like them as well. Then you have, your big guys like Arch Ventures that, they're huge. They won't look at a pre-seed or a seed or even Series A in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of different aspects to it.
Right.
But it's a great question, Geeta.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add, as Stephen is, saying that, you just have to go out there and reach out to people. I happened to meet Stephen at another webinar such as this, and I reached out to him on LinkedIn and we chatted back and forth for a little bit, and then a long time went by and then we reconnected. So, there are people who are just, if you reach out to them on LinkedIn, who are really just open and willing to talk to you.
Yeah.
Um, Anyone else have any questions for Stephen? He said, any question.
Any question? Tiffany, I was going to bring that up, but I didn't know if it was appropriate for the room. But yeah, I mean, that's a classic example right there. We stayed in touch for quite some time, and this opportunity has come along, and it was really amazing that you asked me to be here, and it was certainly a pleasure to be here. And there's been some great questions, and if anybody wants to reach out to me, one-on-one, happy to do that as well. I enjoy what I do is the first thing. So, I think my dad always said to me, if you enjoy what you do for work, you never work a day in your life.
All right.
So Stephen, I have a question. Any question, right?
Sure.
Kind of just to get your view. Now has a lot of funding, funnel into AI, and a lot of startup company or even company try to raise, trying to kind of putting in or incorporate AI platform into their technology. So just kind of getting your thoughts on how kind of do you see the AI disruption or helping with the biotech ecosystem, or how maybe like the founders or new startup do they necessary or see the use or advantage to incorporate that into their workflow or things.
Judy, I'm surprised nobody asked that question sooner. I hesitated to bring up AI, but I'm glad you did. Look, it's here. It's kinks are going to be worked out in the AI side. Um, I've worked with a great company down in Connecticut called Scalables. They're a startup company helping them on the commercial side, and they've developed this really cool platform for it's going to sound kind of trivial, but for pump making a small pump and daisy chaining pumps together. Very cool technology, and it's built off AI. That's their kind of claim to fame is this is going to be run by AI. You can design an AI program for it to run 1 or 10 different pumps. It's really cool technology. But I mean, that's an example. But AI is it's here. I mean, there's companies using it. Pharmaceutical companies using it now to not, I won't say pick their next asset, but certainly develop a program to design their next asset to bring to market. It's not perfect yet. It's getting there. I mean, you're still going to need, the human touch in a lot of cases, but it's becoming more prevalent in the industry, and I personally think it's pretty cool. I will be honest with you, I wasn't sure, even like a year ago, but after reading and seeing what it's been able to do, in the R&D side, in the production side, it's really amazing technology. And I think, as people get more comfortable with it, as it becomes refined more, it's going to be a huge asset to have. But like I said, it's not going to do away from the human touch for sure.
Yeah. Hopefully not replacing all of us.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sure.
Okay. Last opportunity to ask Stephen a question.
Wow, are we at time already? That's amazing.
Just
It went by
about.
fast. There's some great questions. I mean, wow, hats off to the audience. Some fantastic questions, really insightful. Like I said, I wish there were I wish there was a formula or recipe to everything I've said, but there really isn't. I think it's up to each person to build their own formula around how they do this. But certainly there's, from a commercialization standpoint, there's myself, there's people like me out here that are definitely more than willing to help out and guide you the right way. And, if so, become part of the company, in some type of fractional business or a commercial role. So, um, keep that in mind. And, as you move forward and go to commercialize your technologies, there's help out there for sure.
Okay, perfect. So, as we wrap up today's session, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to Stephen for sharing his time, experience, and insights with us. And on behalf of the foundation, thank you, Stephen, for joining us and for your commitment to mentoring and supporting the next generation of inventors. Thank you to everyone who attended today's session, and we look forward to seeing you at our next speaker series. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you very much, Tiffany. Thanks to everybody for being here. Much appreciated. Hope you all have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.